What you just heard are the fucking awesome sounds of the Boss IR-2, and today we're going to take a quick look at it, how I would use it, and how it applies to a metal scenario. Now, full disclosure, this is not a sponsored video or anything. This is just such a fantastic pedal that I had to make a video about it. It's changed basically everything about the way I play guitar, or at least the way I record guitar. It's also huge for performance, but we'll get into all of that. One of the biggest problems I think that beginner guitarists face is that their tone sucks, okay? And a lot of that can be your fault if you're a beginner guitarist. You don't really know what you're doing, we can't fault you for that. However, there is also a huge element of the amp you're using. In case you didn't know this, the guitar you're playing doesn't really affect your tone all that much. There's definitely differences from guitar to guitar, but the biggest contributor to your tone is always going to be your amp. You've probably got a cheap practice amp that pretty much sucks. That's absolutely fine for practice, of course, but when you want to take that thing to the studio or to a live setting, it doesn't really work. They get the job done for practice, but that's about it. Now, if you're looking to solve that problem, I would say you've got to look no further than this thing. What this pedal is it's an amp simulator, and that kind of does what it says on the tin. It simulates an amp, right? Now, of course, you do have to hook this thing up to a PA. However, if in your setup you've got something like these are studio monitors, that'll also work great. In terms of recording with this, one of the great things about it is it's silent, okay? You're straight into your DAW, no worrying about the amp getting too loud, and no worrying about miking up an amp either, which can be a problem if you're just starting out. Miking up amps is way more of an art form than you may expect. And in terms of live sound, one problem I always find is that I've played venues with some really terrible amplifiers, right? Sometimes you never know what you're gonna get. However, with something like this, so long as your venue has a PA, you're going to keep the same sound wherever you go, and it's going to be a pretty damn good sound. Let's get into some of the amps I use, how I use them, and how you could use them. I won't go into some of the cleaner amplifiers here. They're all pretty good. We're just going to take a look at this from a rock metal standpoint. I've got to go in here, just got my guitar, and then I've got a tube screamer and the IR-2 itself. Now, I'll start off with the tube screamer turned off, but I'll turn it on at some point because the amps just sound a lot better with that. In the demo, I boosted it with a blues driver, and I'm just using the tube screamer here so you can get an idea of how each overdrive affects the IR-2. They both do different things. However, I think I prefer the way this pedal interacts with the tube screamer. It just adds a lot of mid-content that's missing. So let's start off already with one of my favorites here. This is the high gain amp. Now, of all the ones we're going to see today, this one actually has the lowest amount of gain. Bit of a deceptive name there, but it still sounds really cool. Let's have a listen. That's also one of the channels you heard in the demo, and I don't know if it came through, but it sounds huge in a mix. There's so much, this is an awful word, goodness. There's so much goodness in this amp. And when you kick on the tube screamer, it gets a lot better. That channel is pretty awesome, and I've used that a couple times live, and it sits so perfectly in a mix, you'd have no trouble getting that coming through. Now moving on, we're skipping the Soldano amp, it's just not very good. So let's move on now to the Brown amp. This is like a Boss custom amp. This is their take on metal, and it's really nice for lead playing. If you kick on a delay or something. Here it is without the tube screamer, just neutral, everything's at 12 o'clock here. So now here it is with that tube screamer and a hell of a lot of delay. I use that a lot in recording. It just works so well for solos. They cut through like a knife. Now we're moving on to some of the really, really distorted channels. And next up is probably my favorite of the bunch. This is the modded channel. There's something about this one. It's clean. It doesn't get too muddy, and you can see actually a lot of the EQ here is quite high, but it just sounds amazing. I find it's really great for downtuned riffs and stuff. Here it is without the tube screamer. And when you kick on the tube screamer, this one just comes alive. That one's really great for rhythm playing. I find I use that for pretty much all my rhythm tracks in the studio setting, and also live as well. That'd be great for a rhythm guitar sound, but it can also work as a lead. That one's very, very versatile. And now we arrive at the final amp we'll take a look at today, and it is, of course, the dual rectifier. Now, I truly don't know how to feel about this one. You've got to mess with the EQ quite a lot to get it to work. You'll see here the mid is all the way up, okay? All the way. Highs are also pretty cranked, and then the low is very, very low. That's a pretty radical EQ setting, but what you get is pretty good. Let's have a listen. It's very muddy, and there's still so much bass when it's all the way off, but the tube screamer helps this one a lot. Let's hear it. That sounds pretty good. It's just the other ones are a lot better, and this one's quite disappointing, to be honest. You know, you hear the name dual rectifier, and I guess your mind sets up a certain expectation. They're very well renowned, and supposedly the EQ controls on this are actually pretty accurate to the actual amp. Supposedly the real amp needs the mids cranked all the way like this, and they work kind of weirdly. Playing power chords on this do feel massive. Anyway, everyone, that is going to wrap up for this video. I do hope you enjoyed. I hope it didn't come across like I'm trying to sell you something here. I'm really not. I'm just trying to share with you how much this pedal has changed the way I play guitar. It cannot be overstated just how much of a lifesaver this thing has been when I can't make much noise and can't afford really decent amps. But that's about it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. Goodbye.